Ooh, there's one. Let's see if this force thing works. Oh, hello there. We didn't notice you until now. You must be a traveler like us. That's wonderful. Did you want to hear our review of this land? No? Sorry, let us try that again. You will watch our review of Fallen Order. Oh, yes! You will like our video when you are done. Okay, this force stuff is the best. You will subscribe when you've finished. What do you mean, no? Well, fine. We'll take 2 out of 3. We suppose this is only fair given we've been putting words in your mouth. But we digress. You didn't come here for a dumb skit. You came for a review. So let's get on with it. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is a mouthful. And it's also what happens when you take Sekiro's dodge parry focus combat, Uncharted's movement, and Metroid Prime's maps, puzzles, and power-ups and apply a Star Wars skin over it. And this chimera of a game works really well. Most of the time. You play as Cal, a Jedi Padawan who went underground after the events of Star Wars Episode 3 and remained in hiding for a few years. Events in the intro unfold pretty quickly, and they force Cal to take a more proactive approach to saving the galaxy. You know, hero's journey and all that. After being forcibly recruited to a new crew, you're dropped off on a world with one objective: go to the vault. And no, we don't mean a fallout shelter. After that, your new, friends let you and your lightsaber do all the work. And from here, the game truly begins. The map layout feels reminiscent of From Software's Souls games, with loose paths rather than a truly open-world style, though it does often allow you to select from a couple different paths at a time. This tighter level design lends itself well to the aforementioned Uncharted-like movement, with hanging vines to climb and chasms to jump all over the place. As you continue along, you'll uncover paths you cannot access yet, either because you don't have the necessary power or because it's locked from the other side. This reminded us starkly of Metroid Prime, a very good memory to call on, and it promises you reasons to come back and visit old areas later. There are many endless pits along these paths, but fortunately, rather than killing you outright, they only sap a small portion of your health and return you to the ground a few seconds later. This is much more forgiving, and in a game so full of platforming challenges, it makes a lot of sense. And in the event you do finally die, the game will readily respawn you at the nearest meditation spot. These act exactly as you'd expect, giving you a place to save and heal up, as well as level up abilities on your skill tree. They are abundant enough to allow for exploration, but uncommon enough to be challenging, which, of course, is always a good sign. Still, despite their relative commonness, respawning at them actually introduces our first major criticism. After death, the game takes some time to reload you at this last spot, on the order of 30 or even 40 seconds sometimes. And, even after it's done loading... Did that just happen? Huh. Perhaps it was a freak accident for us. We certainly hope so. But it was a bit jarring, though admittedly quite funny, to encounter this. It seemed, after some testing, that enemies took some time to spawn, even after the sinfully long loading screen. And while it did amuse us, probably more than it should have, this clearly wasn't working as intended. It is a bit of a disappointing hiccup, though we are pleased to share that it is one of only a very few true criticisms we have. And since we're discussing enemies anyways, let's move on to combat. Many have compared it to Dark Souls, because apparently everything is the Dark Souls of everything else these days. But we're reminded more of FromSoft's more recent entry, Sekiro. The combat, especially with larger enemies, felt like it placed more value on parrying and telegraphed unblockables that really gave us that same vibe. Plus, Sekiro has more verticality, what with the jumping and all, and Star Wars does the same thing. Weaving in force powers feels natural and powerful, and it really did sell that fantasy that we're a Jedi in the Star Wars universe. Force push is our current favorite. Few things bring us such joy as watching enemies, T-posed or otherwise, go flying off the nearest endless pit. All we need is a Wilhelm scream, and we'd have hours of entertainment right there. Luckily, the game does have difficulty settings, and ones you can change freely at that. So, even though combat was difficult, we played on Jedi Master, it never felt unfair, and the option to turn it down was always present if we could simply not get past something. We never needed to, but still for many, difficulty has been the reason they cannot get into Souls games, and for a beloved IP such as Star Wars, the added accessibility only makes the game that much better for everyone. Difficulty aside, the only thing that really irked us, had us cursing at our screen, were some of these stupid sliding segments. It actually gets used fairly often, and learning to control it was actually pretty painful. Perhaps we are just bad at these things, but we lost so much health descending these pits sometimes that we would backtrack to refresh our healing items, our Estus flask, if you will. Shifting gears, because segues are hard, the universe is rendered quite faithfully, with audio and visual styles being both unique enough to have identity, but similar enough to feel as though they belong in the Star Wars universe. The fidelity is high, with HDR support and all the other bells and whistles one expects from AAA titles these days. Good job on them for all the work they put into this one. It really does feel faithful. But we are running short on time, so let's answer that all-important question. Who will get the most out of this game? The obvious first is a Star Wars fan. The world is lovingly crafted, with enough nods to the series to make it feel like it belongs. And if you like Star Wars, and you like games, there's a better than average chance that you will enjoy this one. Next up, our recommendation is for those who enjoy Soulsborne combat. It is pretty plentiful in this game, and at higher difficulties it can be equally challenging. Easily enough to scratch that itch if you've been wanting to play something after clearing Hollow Knight or Code Vein. And our last recommendation goes out to fans of Metroidvania-style games. Yes, Souls technically works similarly in that regard too, but there was something distinctly Metroid about how the world unfolded. Maybe it's just the future fantasy setting, or past fantasy, we suppose, but it feels more like an appropriate comparison. If you like your games with a healthy dose of puzzle solving, and you like your power-ups to feel like meaningful additions to your arsenal rather than a token reward, then you will appreciate what this game offers. However, as with any game, this one isn't for everyone either. If you don't particularly care for Soulsborne combat for whatever reason, it is a pretty important aspect of this game, making up a good half or so of game time. You can turn it down to story difficulty, but with a combat system so lovingly crafted, we cannot help but feel that you'd rob yourself of an important piece of the overall experience. Though, of course, take that with a grain of salt, as this just may be our own bias speaking, and you may be fine with missing out just for the Star Wars experience. A little bit more firmly, we can recommend against it if you don't care for puzzles. Most action-adventure titles in this genre have puzzles of some sort, but some people don't really care to spend time, sometimes a long time, puzzling out the solution to a problem. That's okay, nothing wrong with feeling that way, but the game has enough puzzles, some that have many, many steps, that we feel you would spend a lot of time being frustrated and just want to get back to killing the baddies again. It feels good to us, but for those who do not care for puzzles, it would be an absolute pace killer, so keep that in mind before you make your purchase. And instead of a negative third bullet, we decided to introduce a consideration. This is a Star Wars game, and therefore it pulls heavily on Star Wars canon and lore, and expects you to understand the vast majority of it going in. This does not mean you will not enjoy this game if you haven't watched Star Wars, but it does mean that you will probably be lost on some of the finer details about the story that unfolds around you. It is still a great game that stands alone, but if the footage you've seen doesn't appeal to you aesthetically, then weigh your decision carefully. And that's it. We hope you've enjoyed our little breakdown of this little corner of the Star Wars universe. But what do we know? We are but a stray cat. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have more stormtroopers that have just been begging for a lightsaber to the face. Until next time, Wanderer. Oh, we are so keeping this lightsaber.